Good afternoon. We are preparing to begin our study this afternoon, and we've been discussing the fact that we think some of you are not down here because of the elevator. It appears to be fixed and is running, but there hasn't been an official announcement. And the others of you who typically watch by way of Touchdown, just know that for the next couple of minutes, things are going to be a little ragged. And we're going to go ahead and begin, though, and hope that those who couldn't get here will watch or come in on Wednesday, and that will be fun. Today, the whole focus is going to be on the scroll of the seven seals. And I know that if you read those chapters 6 through 8, you got that. I did something that I thought would maybe help a little bit because we're also visual. It's crude. So I'll check that before I give it to you. I did not spend too many hours on this, but yes, you may, absolutely. And then give one to Sylvia, if you will. I've got the cost of blue stuff in the middle of that stack.
Oh, you even colored it for me. Yes.
Now, you may think that this was sitting there with a crayon or something and decided to get crazy. Be that as it may, that's not what this is about. I know that if you read your scripture, then you have some of this in your head. But keeping it in your head, even if it's read,
I read it.
And I thought this might have a better shot of sticking. So on the left, I tried to draw a crude version of a scroll. And so each of the yellow ovals is a sign of one of the seven scrolls. They're not evenly spaced to match the idea that the first four are different and that the first four are open when? All at the same time. Okay? They're treated like one seal, but they're four. Then we go to seal 5, and then after that you'll remember that there's this little interlude, if you will, of sort of mini visions, and they're not part of the seven seals. And then after that, we go back to seal 6 and 7. And then I did, to the best of myself, best of my ability, the shortest summary of what those were to help you remember. It's not detailed by any whatever. So I thought as Mickey goes through this, and you have this visual as well, that might be helpful. And if it is, that's great. And if it turns out that it isn't, that's okay too, because we all learn differently. I thought we might go through this in preparation for Mickey. I'm thinking after having said that and given it to you, I believe I'm going to let you have this and let Mickey talk, and then we'll come back. Because the whole lesson today is on the seven seals. And that sounds pretty straight up and down, black and white, but it's still a lot. It is a lot. So as soon as Chuck is ready, we'll let Mickey share with us. We need to, somehow I want to try to make sure the folks that didn't come today, I know that Shirley will take care of one, to remind them that they can come Wednesday. And that will be fun. So those of you at home, we are getting ready to start here in just a second. I think there's some kind of a little hold up, and that's okay. But as I was just saying to the group, today's lesson is entirely on the seven seals. So if you have your Bible there at your home, you may want to have it open to chapters 6 through 8, and that will help as well. And if you'd like to have one of these to help you kind of remember the seven seals, just let me know, and I will get that to you as well. Reminders that Wednesday evening at 7, I'll be doing the last meditation over Touchdown, and it will include the last 2 words from the cross, the 6th and 7th word. Then Thursday at 4, we'll have the Maundy Thursday service in the chapel, and I would love for you to come and worship in that service. But for those of you who just simply cannot, it will come through Touchdown at that exact time. And then Friday afternoon in here in the fellowship hall, I'm going to have the playing of the 7 Last Words by Du Bois that we did last year. And everyone seemed to really feel like that was a good observance during Good Friday. And so we'll have chairs set up in here, and then we'll also have it coming across to you as well. And we'll have it played up on the big screen. Then Holy Saturday, which I like to call Black Saturday, nothing. And then Sunday morning, we will celebrate Easter morning. I mentioned that the first 4 seals are all open at the same time. If you remember the 4 seals, and the thing you've heard all your life, which there's a lot of fiction to, the 4 horsemen, they should go together. So we know that those first 4 are going to be one horseman after another. The first rider comes out on a white horse, right? Mm-hmm. Now, we know that if you're on a white horse, in symbolism, in apocalyptic literature, it means that you are victorious. You're a victorious conqueror. Doesn't mean you're a good conqueror. It just means that you are winning. And so in my synopsis, I've said that he is carrying a bow and he has a crown. The bow was the weapon of choice of the Parthian warriors. And they lived next door, so to speak, to Rome, the eastern edge of Rome. I can just picture Ukraine and some of the countries near Ukraine. But the symbolism is suggesting that this Parthian invasion would be successful if it took place. Not that it's good or bad, just that it would be successful. Then the second horseman comes out, and he comes out on a red horse. He's got a great big sword, and so it doesn't take a whole lot of guessing to think that that might mean he's powerful, right? But it means that he's been given permission, for lack of a better word, to take all the peace from the earth. Just imagine all the peace being sucked out of the earth. And then the people, we think we don't have a lot of peace now, but if there was zero peace, then literally all the people would be just killing each other. More than just with words, which is what we're doing right now. And so it was a symbolism. This red horse is symbolism of war. And war always leads to bloodshed, ergo the red. Then the third horseman comes trotting out. He's on a black horse. Well, since we grew up in the era where they still wore black to funerals and wore black armbands, we would guess that black stands for death. And that's what it stands for. But there's a lot more in this. I didn't try to put it in here, but if you remember your reading, he comes out carrying scales. Well, at our house, that's a sign of death, all right, because we get on scales every single morning, and we hate them. We just hate them. But these scales talk about the weighing of the wheat and some other, too much information, honey. And what all that writing that you read really says is that when there's war, after war, the people are going to have to face famine and economic disaster. So that's what those scales represent. And then we do with the horsemen. Now, I don't want to steal Mickey's thunder, but anywhere in there, did you remember reading or did you hear me just say that any of those horsemen or the 4 horsemen together have anything to do with the ending of the world? You'd have to extrapolate a great deal to get there. But that's what people have done. Okay, now we go to 5. We talked, and I hope you have in your head that picture of what the throne room might look like. But remember, we've got the 24 chairs of the elders around, 12 representing the tribes of tribes of Israel, and 12 representing the 12 disciples. And they're around the throne, and on the throne we have this force that really can't be seen as an entity because it's God, and we can't see God. And then we have the lamb that looks like he's been slaughtered and sewn back together, and yet he's living and standing there, and that represents Christ. And we have this big scroll, which we're going to talk about today. And then we have other things that we're going to get into. But one of the things we haven't said much about yet is what's under the throne. You think, well, what will be under God's throne? Nothing. But we know there is something under there. And whenever you see pictures, you see little heads and everything under there. They are the martyred Christians. These are people who've given their lives for the sake of spreading the word of Christianity. And they are there praying for vengeance against the people who've slain them. And they're getting the message, no, it's not time yet. It's not time yet, okay? Okay, I'm going to stop there. Charlie, we're getting close.
Yeah.
Okay. Not that hearing it more than once would not be good for all of us. Okay? All right. Presenting the seven seals of the one scroll.
Welcome to Session 8 of Revelation. This lesson begins on page 53 in your participant workbook.
What we're going to do is we're going to look rather carefully at the seven seals. The others, we'll look at parts of them, but we don't have time to look at all of them in great detail. But the seven seals are very interesting, partly because this is the one out of which you get the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And I can't remember when it was, 96, 97, 98, somewhere in that period, as we were rapidly racing toward Y2K and all of the hysteria that was attendant to that. A number of my students started bringing me these rags that you find at the checkout counters at many of the grocery stores. It wasn't the Enquirer. It was one of the others. I don't remember what it was. Maybe the Star or something. I don't know. I don't keep up with those things. But they brought me a whole bunch of them. Same one, but a whole bunch of them. And on the front of this one, there was this huge black and white grainy picture of four horses and four riders. And the caption under that was, "The end times are near, because the four horsemen of the apocalypse have been seen in New Mexico." Yeah. And unfortunately, there were some people who really believed that. And of course, you turned over, and there was a long article on the inside which said, oh yes, this is a sign that the year 2000 is going to be it, and so on and so forth. So a lot of my students brought me that. I think I threw all of them away. I should have saved one of the pictures so that I could have shown you the four horsemen of the apocalypse in New Mexico. Of course, you would expect to see them in New Mexico, wouldn't you? But that's another matter. All right, let's see what they are here. Are they predictions of something to come in the future, or are they descriptions of something that's going on with the people in the church at that particular time and place? Let's look and see. I saw when the Lamb opened the first of the seven seals, I heard one of the four living creatures say with a voice of thunder, "Come out." And I looked, and behold, there was a white horse, and his rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him. He went out conquering and for the purpose of conquering. Now, a couple of things need to be said. First, he's riding a white horse. Does that automatically make him a good guy? No. It means he's only what? A victor, a conqueror. You will notice in the book of Revelation there are lots of what are called antithetical figures. That is, two figures that look exactly alike, but they are at 180 degrees from each other. In other words, you've got a rider here on a white horse in chapter 6 who ain't a good guy. But later on, you'll find in chapter 19 a rider on a white horse who is a good guy. And there are a number of these antithetical figures in the book of Revelation. And you need to, how shall we put it, you need to sort of keep your eye open for those, because understanding that they are antithetical figures can help you interpret them a bit more precisely, as it were. Now, secondly, a bow was given to him, a crown was given to him, meaning he is a ruler, and he went out conquering and for the purpose of conquering, meaning he went out to enforce and impose his will upon any and all who got in his way. Who immediately would these folks, for whom this was originally written, think about? Think about Domitian and Rome, wouldn't it? Why? Because Domitian in Rome has said you're going to go down to that shrine and you're going to do your homage down there, go through the motions at least, whether you want to or not. Well, whenever somebody goes out conquering and for the purpose of conquering, that means what? There's going to be conflict. There's going to be some consequences to that kind of pressure and activity. So let's keep on reading. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come out." And out came another horse, bright red. His rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, that people would slay one another, and he was given a great sword. Now, of course, when you get somebody going out to impose his will upon others, as Domitian had done, there are going to be people who are going to say, "What? I'm not going to do that." And the Christians were told, we can't do that. And because of that, there are going to be consequences. Some people are going to die. He was given a great sword. And a sword, especially with Rome, was understood as a symbol for punishment and death. Because the usual way the Romans had, at least for Roman citizens, of executing capital punishment was how? Beheading. Absolutely. And they did that with a sword. Then when he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come out." And I looked, and behold, there was a black horse. His rider had a balance in his hand, and I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, but do not harm the oil and the wine." Now you say, what in the world is that? Well, black in apocalyptic usually indicates the lack of something, remember? And in this case, it's obviously the lack of food. Now what does it mean, a quart of wheat for a denarius? Well, a worker in those days, the usual ordinary worker, made 1 denarius for a day's work. How much wheat does it take to keep one person alive basically for 1 day? Make a wild guess. A quart. Now, remember we said this is an economic persecution. If you don't go down to the shrine, the Roman shrine, and get your ticket punched, you can't compete on a level playing field on the economic scene. And you can only buy enough wheat for a whole day's work to keep one person alive for 1 day. And some people would say, "Oh, that's not too bad. At least you can stay alive." But most people in those days had families, didn't they? A wife and 2-3 kids maybe at home. And that's a very effective form of persecution, isn't it? It's one thing to ask you individually to starve to death for the sake of your beliefs and your God. It's another thing to starve your children to death, isn't it? That's a very effective form of persecution, and one, by the way, which goes on in the world even to this day in many, many places. Believe it or not. Do you renounce your Christ, you'll get something to eat. If you don't, you starve. So that's what's going on. Now, you say, well, but they can get 3 quarts of barley. Well, that'll go a little further in terms of feeding folk. But interesting, barley is not nearly as nutritious as wheat, and you'll starve to death quicker on 3 quarts of barley than you will on 1 quart of wheat, if it's distributed out among folk. And then he says, don't harm the oil and the wine. And those were staples in those days. And so what that means is we don't have a real famine here. There's not a lack of these foodstuffs. It's just that the people who won't go to the Roman shrine and get their ticket punched, they can't get it. They can't get it. There's no shortage of it. They just can't get it. Well, of course, that's ultimately, a cycle or sequence like that is ultimately going to lead to what? Somebody's going to die. And guess what? When he opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature say, "Come out." And I looked, and behold, there was a greenish-gray horse. It's usually called, usually translated pale horse. Greenish-gray, of course, as you probably know, is the color of a corpse. And so the word in the Greek is chloros, greenish-gray. And of course, that means the rider's name was Death, and the place of death followed after him. Now notice the word Hades here is not hell. Some of the older translations used to translate Hades in the New Testament as hell. There is a word in the New Testament which should be translated hell, but it is not Hades. It is the word Gehenna. Gehenna in the New Testament is basically the word that means you're apart from God, away from the people of God, outside the pale, etc. And that, of course, is the word which is used for hell. However, the word Hades is the equivalent of the Hebrew word Sheol, which is the place of the dead. And remember, the place of the dead, under the old Hebrew idea, was not a place where there were rewards or punishments. Everybody went to the place of the dead. So Hades is a reference to the place of the dead. It's not a reference to hell. I saw a pale horse whose rider's name was Death, and the place of death followed after him. And they were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword and famine and pestilence and by the wild beasts of the earth. And these people who are having this read to them say, we understand that. We're some of those who are getting killed here with pestilence and famine and by a wild beast of the earth. Then when he opened the fifth seal, interesting, the scene shifts. In the first four, you're down here on earth, describing the situation that's going on among those people for whom this was originally written, remember. But in the fifth seal, we move to another realm. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar those who had been slain for the word of God and the witness they had borne. Who are these? The martyrs. And where are they? In heaven, right around the altar of God. They believe, that there was in heaven the prototype of the altar down here on earth. So in heaven there was this prototype altar that was there. And where are the martyrs? Right around the base of the altar up there with God. They have been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. These are the martyrs. And they cried out with a loud voice, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell upon the earth? And they were each given a white robe, symbolic of victory, and told to rest a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and kinsmen should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. In other words, some people have suffered martyrdom, and guess what? Some more are going to have to suffer martyrdom as well. The time is not going to be all that long, but it's not going to be tomorrow either, is it? It's not going to be tomorrow. And so therefore they are told to rest. Now there are a few scholars who want to talk about the fact that there isn't a real persecution going on in Revelation. That it's a perceived persecution. That the people just thought that they were being persecuted. Well, if you've got martyrs, I don't believe that's a perceived persecution, do you? And then there are some others who say, oh, well, no, it's a real persecution, but it is an anticipated persecution. That is, it wasn't a persecution going on right then, but it was anticipated that it would come down the road. Well, again, if you've already got people dying, and the prediction that you're going to get some more to die too, that's not anticipated. That's real, isn't it? That's present, isn't it? So just keep that in your mind when you're reading things about Revelation. And then when he opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth, the full moon like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that is rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the generals, and the rich, and the strong, every one slave and free, hid in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, fall on us, and hide us from the face of the one seated on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath is come, and who can stand before it? Now you say, what in the world is all this about earthquakes and the sun and black as sackcloth, full moon, blood, stars falling? Typical apocalyptic imagery, almost always related to God's coming in judgment on a persecutor. It's symbolic. In other words, if God is in control of the natural order, and God is in control of the created order, when God comes, things in the created order get a little out of kilter, don't they? Interesting, because when they come in judgment, the people who are not part of the community of faith know that God's after them, and so they do what? They cry to the mountains, fall on us, and save us from the wrath of the one seated upon the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their judgment has come. So this first sequence, the 7 seals, is a cycle of judgment, depicting how the Christians at that time were being treated, but also giving them hope that what? It won't be long before the persecution will be over, but some of you are going to be asked to lay down your life for the cause. It ain't over yet. But it won't be long before God or God's agent, in this case both, will intervene and take away the source of the persecution. And it ain't going to be pretty when God's judgment falls upon the persecutor. Now at this point you would think, well, we've had the 6th seal, we're going to open the 7th seal, and we're going to get to go home early. Well, guess what? Apocalyptic doesn't work that way. What we get is an interlude, first of all, between the 6th and the 7th seal. And the interlude has to do with the sealing of God's people. And that's depicted under the basis of the 144,000 of the tribes of Israel and so on. But the symbolic meaning of that, of course, is the people of God. They are going to be sealed, meaning they're going to have a special protection. A special protection when? In the midst of this persecution. They will not be destroyed. They will stay, if they will stay the course, if they will stay hitched, as the old saying goes, then when God's judgment falls upon the persecutor, they will be ready to go out once again and do and be what it is that God called them to do and to be. But they're in the midst of the persecution now. And they need some assurance that they're going to survive. And when in the Old Testament and the early New Testament time, when you seal someone, you put a protection around them that guarantees that they won't be destroyed. Now that doesn't mean that individuals won't have to be martyred, because he's already said that's the case. But as far as the community of faith, are they going to be destroyed? No. Just think for a moment. Where do you read about Rome today? In the history books. What about the church? It's still alive and well. Maybe it ain't as well as it ought to be, but it's still here. And it's still active. And it's still significant. And it's still transforming. And it's still the agent of God in the world for God's will to be done. But Rome, they're in the dustbin of history, aren't they? Who won this battle? Who won? God and God's people won. And that's what they're talking about here. Well, then in chapter 8, verse 1, when the Lamb opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for half an hour. And I saw the seven, that's probably a dramatic pause. Most of there are 6 or 8 different interpretations of that, but more than likely it's just dramatic pause, partly because dramatic is what apocalyptic usually is, isn't it? Dramatic. Then I saw the 7 angels who stood before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. We're now into the second cycle of 7. And another angel came and stood at the altar with a golden censer, given much incense, to mingle with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar before the throne. And the smoke of the incense rose with the prayers of the saints from the hand of the angel before God. The angel took the censer and filled it with fire from the altar and threw it upon the earth. And there were peals of thunder, voices, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. And then you get, again, a sequence of 7, or actually 6, depicting again what's going on in symbolic terms, the persecution against the Church of God, etc., and the demonic nature of those who are doing the persecuting. And then in chapters 10 and 11, or the most part of 11, you get the interlude between the 6th and the 7th trumpet. And we'll have to start with that next time, because my time has run out for tonight.
I keep meaning to say, one of the things about the videos is that very often when Mickey goes into a church, he may come in just to do a single session, but often if it's a church with money, like Christ, United Methodist might have him come and do like a whole week. And so that's why, he'll say after the break or whatever. That's not really that important. Couple of things. One, let me explain that on the chart I gave you, I kind of generalized what the symbolic nature of these seals would be, not really gearing it directly to Rome, etc. But, he gave you that, and that's good. He is seeing this break after seal 6, which would make me wrong. But I would never bet against Mickey. Anyway, he did not bring up the interposed visions. I thought that was interesting. I know that his goal is to lift up Revelation for everyone, so that it can be understood in general. And that does kind of go off on a little tangent. But it's there. So hopefully you will take an opportunity to reread the scripture there and see what I'm talking about. The 2 little visionettes, I just made that word up. The first has to do with 144,000 people suddenly are standing in front of John. Well, you know what that means, right? It's the complete people of God. 12 times 12 and all of that. But then the second little visionette is a whole bunch of people, but they're the complete people of God, but you can't really count or know the exact number. And then the first one is basically saying things are bad, they're going to be bad, but hang on. And then in the second one, it's saying the badness is passing and you're going to be okay. So be it. All right. Now, questions. Oh, one other thing, and some of it we have to remember, is that Mickey, who is known as a New Testament, Old Testament scholar, when he makes one of the scholars, he knows he's one of them. He didn't say this, but some of my understandings have come from newer studies, which doesn't make his wrong. But he didn't mention the Greek, and he is a Greek, whatever. When the seals were opened for the first 4, and the voice says, "Come." Interestingly, the Greek word for come is also go. And so some of the scholars aren't sure if the message was to come out or to go out, whatever. That's about as much time as I've spent wondering about that. I'm trying to think of anything else. Did I doze off? Or, no, he did. Okay. I just didn't think he elaborated on seal 7 as much, but that's okay. Okay, questions before we go any further? Because this is kind of, in fact, some writings will say that it is with chapter 6 that the book of Revelation actually begins. Because up until then, everything's been preparatory. I think these 7 are going to provide kind of a framework for helping you to understand other cycles that we'll go through. Because it doesn't get any easier, or it doesn't get any more black and white. Are there things about the 7 seals and that vision that we don't understand? Yes. That's your answer. Yes. And so if you find yourself saying, but I don't understand. If that's that, then how could that? There are a lot of things we don't understand. Could be because of the visionary nature of what John's writing about. It could be about the language. Could be about our lack of knowledge about things. Who knows? But we just have to accept that we don't know everything about it. But I think we know the things that might matter to us, that might make a difference to us. Okay? I'm trying to think if there's anything else about the 7 seals. Anybody coming up with a question?
They all seem to relate to circumstances of the day.
Yes, yes. And that's one of the reasons, I think Mickey does, and I know I do, and it's easy to, laugh at old-fashioned things or whatever, like people are laughing at us now because we're old-fashioned. But it doesn't mean that there weren't logical reasons for that, because when you read it, if you had just enough knowledge to put together what was happening, you could compare it to the current day, couldn't you? What eras have not had the very things that they're talking about? Somewhere. Maybe not between Rome and the Jewish people, but somewhere. And so I do think that we can pull some of the understanding out for today. But that's different than saying, oh my goodness, we've got famine going on. Oh, climate change. Climate change, that's definite proof, right? That the end is near. Might be. We can go too far with that to say that when these things happen, the world's going to just fall apart, because that's not the way they were written. But it's another thing to say, stay the course, keep the faith. If you die at the hand of a persecutor or for your beliefs, either way, you're going to come out on top, because you're going to be in the great hereafter, whatever that is. Isn't that worth taking? So
And maybe it also says this is an ongoing situation.
yes, yes. And we've seen that. We have the benefit of all those history books. Some we've read and forgotten, and some so many people have just never paid any attention to. And they show that very thing. He was exaggerating for effect when he said, where's Rome today? Well, Rome's doing just fine, thank you very much. But it isn't the supreme power, is it? Because during this study, during this part of the Bible, Rome was the big dog, because the world as we knew it was kind of limited. So Rome's doing just fine, except if you look at it as being over great quantities of people and countries and so forth. But you can see different eras when this has happened over and over. So look at just something as finite as the Ukrainian people. Are a famine and economic disaster anything to do with the war that's going on? Yeah. The martyrs were people that died for their faith, for Christianity. Are people dying in Ukraine for their beliefs today?
Yes.
Not necessarily Christianity. Don't listen at home. I have to pray about the fact that it bothers me that Putin is listed as a Christian. He cites himself as a Christian. But anyway, they're not dying for Christianity per se, but they're willing to die for the right to be free and to live free in their own country. So, these things are not alien at all. Okay, let's turn to our questions. We may not do them all. Okay, here we go. Something I can't overlook and I want to keep saying it, who is opening the seals? Who's opening the seals? There should be a resounding cry here. The Lamb.
The Lamb.
Yeah, don't be afraid, because wrong, not just go, wrong. No, it's the Lamb. And who is the Lamb altogether?
Jesus.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you. Jesus the Christ. Yes. Okay. Questions? Well, I'll get there eventually. Keep turning page. Oh, here we go. Yes. What is the message of the cycles of 7? Now you say, well, wait a minute. We've only had this one. This is too advanced for us. But he kind of just gave it away, didn't he? And he sort of did when he introduced the whole study. If there's a message of this cycle of 7, is it going to be the same message in the others? So we can, again, extrapolate by just knowing what the message for these 7 seals is. So the message of the seals is what?
Judgment.
It's going to be really bad. There are going to be people conquering you that aren't good guys or girls. And people are going to die. But even if they die, they're going to receive their reward if they have died for the message of God and Jesus Christ. And that no matter what happens, if we hang on and stay true to the faith, in the end, we will be victorious, but in a way that human beings probably have a hard time grasping. Okay. Would you agree? Have I made it too simple? Or do you think that is kind of the message of the 7 seals?
Yeah.
With some colorful things to, lift it up, if you will. So do you think that might be the message of the next cycle of 7? And the one after that? The answer would be yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I didn't let you answer that. I just gave you the answer. So. What is unnecessary to, wow, my glasses have finally come in. Why is it unnecessary to argue over historical continuous versus recapitulation theories of the cycles of 7? Do you remember Mickey talking about that last time? The historical one says, oh, this is going to happen, and one's going to happen right after the other, all the way through all the cycles, chronologically, and then the world's going to end. And the other one, the recapitulation, simply says what we're saying here. This is a story of what's happening and how it will come to an end. Well, maybe you didn't get it that way. Here's another vision of how it will happen, and then here's another vision. Why is it unnecessary to argue about that?
We don't know.
We really don't know. That's a good answer. We really don't know. Is there maybe a common sense answer?
It's going to happen as Jesus plans it.
I would say it's not worth arguing about. If I truly understand it to mean, doesn't mean that that's absolutely accurate. But if I understand it to mean that God does intervene when things get so bad and brings order about and lets good, then I already know that this is the same story that's going to be repeated. So things that are happening in this era are not going to necessarily be duplicated in the next. But as Ted pointed out, the kinds of things people do to each other and against their Lord do reoccur. They do reoccur. Okay? Good job. Do we need, this is not funny, do we need to identify the components of the demonic forces in the second cycle? Not exactly sure. Well, we're talking about the second cycle there, to be honest with you, but what do you think? Take a guess.
Demonic forces are usually about the same all the time.
I kind of go with Jill, yeah. We'll save that a little bit for next time. But demonic's pretty, I mean, if Chuck said, honey, lock the door, the devil's coming, I wouldn't say, can you describe in detail what that means? I would be busy going under the bed. Yes, exactly. Because you know, if you go under the bed, the devil can't catch you. All right. Who do you think the author was writing for? Now, you know the answer to this.
The people under persecution.
The specific answer is the people under oppression at the time. It wouldn't be apocalyptic literature if it were just a story for the ages. But can a story of specificity for a certain time and place also have a message for the ages? So what could you say, and everybody could determine their own answer, but what might your answer be there? The author is writing to, I'll just take that preposition. John is writing to the people then, and that's basically what Jesus has said. Write this down and get it out there. This is what people need to hear and to know. But I think that it's the book that is included in the canon, therefore it has to be for me, because I believe that everything in the Holy Bible is for me in some form or fashion. So it's for us, but just not to be taken as a pattern to cut out exactly what's going to be happening. Okay? Could the world as we know it come to an end with Jesus returning on Mother's Day? I think it could, absolutely. Do I think it will? I don't. But when that happens, it will be because that's when God has determined that it's going to happen. Not because, climate change, Putin, Trump, no. It'll just be because that's the time that God has chosen to bring the world to an end. I'm putting Sylvia to sleep. I'm so sorry. So my answer would be,
When you put me to sleep, I'm gone.
Listen, I know, honey, I put myself to sleep sometimes. But seriously, my answer, which doesn't need to be yours at all, is, like I said, it's written to these people, and there are messages that we can take for our own understanding, but not that it is these things to watch out for. There are no four horsemen of the apocalypse for the future. They were for them. And we can certainly identify with victors who aren't good guys, with war and the wielding of a sword, and with economic and inflationary disasters, and with death. These are things that do pertain to now. All right, how are we doing? Ooh, better than usual. It was pretty specific in that, as I said, it's all about those 7 seals. There's a lot more in there that you might want to go back and look at.
I think too, Pat, that they were writing for the people under oppression at that time, but I think also it tells us that no matter what we go through, there is hope if we cling to our faith.
Absolutely.
The hope that we can hold on to through everything.
I think that's exactly right, Jill. I thought that Mickey said a telling thing for all of us. Remember when he said that some people just look at this and say, they weren't really being oppressed. I can tell you about oppression. That wasn't really oppression. And it always makes me stop to think, if you feel oppressed, then you're going to feel the same way you do if you are being oppressed. Now, I do believe that these people are being oppressed. But going to what Jill said, aren't we all subject to some form of oppression at any given time? Now, it might be relative. If all the stoplights seem to work against you, that's relative oppression. But whenever there's an era of sickness or bad times or even war, the keeping of the faith and knowing who's ultimately in charge is the message.
I would say oppression and depression.
Exactly. And nothing will make you more depressed quicker than oppression. Exactly. I think a sickness can be very oppressive. Yes, I do. Any other words of wisdom for the group? Those of you who are watching the study at home, I would love it if you would ever email your thoughts or questions so that we can lift them up in here at our next session. That would be wonderful and be very helpful for all of us. Well, as he mentioned, I did want to back up. He mentioned the trumpets, which are coming next. And he also said we won't go into all of them in as much detail. We may decide that we'd like to add a little more detail. We'll see how that goes with our time. But as we get to the trumpets, you remember last time we talked about the holy, holy, holy and all the different references that have come down into the hymns, not come from the hymns and gone up, but the other way around. And so people have used their scriptural knowledge to convey these wonderful messages. How many of you just love the hymn, "It's Well With My Soul"? It's one of my favorites. You know the verse in there where it talks about the clouds be rolled back like a scroll? I would bet you money that came from this understanding. And so there are a lot of things like that. The trump shall resound. Poetic and yet not accidental. So I ain't got nothing else to tell you, unless you have a question or something. I know Sarah's been waiting for years for me to run out of stuff to say. Oh my goodness. I do think now that you have heard Mickey and you've allowed me to confuse you a little bit, I hope not, that now would be the best of times to go back and reread those chapters. I do think it'll jump up at you more. And then maybe you will pull out some things that you want to make sure that there isn't an answer for or something that you should understand. Okay? All right. Well, unless someone has something they would like to share, we will go to our prayer time. And we are on page 52. No, we're not.
58.
58. I closed my book. That was not smart. Let's pray together the prayer at the bottom of page 58. Let's pray. Mighty God, we need reassurance time and time again that you in your power and glory will be with us and will hold us in your hand. Your might is awesome, so we ask you to lend us your strength when we face adversity. We ask, Lord, that you stand by us and that you help us stand by you. We make this prayer in the name of the Lamb, Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Amen. We'll have a wonderful evening. And if I don't see you before Thursday, I hope to see you at Molly Thursday. Those of you who have assignments, I'll see you at 3 o'clock. And a couple of you are going to see me for a minute right after this class. So we're done.